It is 24 minutes after the hour. It's a therapeutic Thursday, the day at the end of which we'll all feel better about ourselves. And you're tuned to Broken Road Radio. And this is the morning show. Pastor Robbie joins us now from Ashburn, Virginia. Robbie, you have a guest. And we've seen him at least once before with you here. And he returned to your place, and he wants to do it all over again. And introduce Stephen to us.
Good to be with you, Jim and Dave, on the Broken Road. A pleasure, as always. Have my friend, the Reverend Dr. Steve Hersey. No, I'm just kidding. He's not all those things. But brilliant man, my boss of 5 years in Haiti when I was doing mission work in Haiti. Steve and his wife, Ruth, were lifetime missionaries in Haiti. They've done a whole career, their whole lifetime of ministry in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, at a Christian school there. And my wife and I met Ruth and Steve when we were considering going to Haiti. And they showed us great hospitality when they should have been at the beach. And we didn't know that until later, but we were in the neighborhood on a short-term trip. And we ended up moving there. We got on the plane on the way home, and my wife said, well, that's settled. We're moving to Haiti. And I had to, needed a little bit of convincing.
And your response was, yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. But Steve is currently in Uganda doing mission work, and you were in South America for a spell too, right?
Yep.
And
Paraguay.
Well, Robbie, you're one of the most giving people I know, and you hang out with other giving people, apparently. Stephen, welcome. It's good to have you along. And since turnabout is fair play, I gave Robbie a perfunctory introduction. Why don't you introduce Pastor Robbie to us?
Yeah, okay, I'll do my best. I'm not sure I can do Robbie justice, but Robbie's a great friend. He's been a great pastor and counselor to me, and just an excellent Bible teacher that I appreciate his insights, the way he digs into the Bible, the culture, the history, and brings it to life. And he's just encouraged many people. So that's my friend Robbie.
Robbie's a special friend, and we appreciate him here. Robbie's an Anglican pastor. Most of our listeners know that because they tune in every week for him. Church in Fairfax, home in Ashburn, Virginia, right next to Washington, D.C. And you just got back from vacation. Robbie, we missed you last week. You had the whole family with you, went to West Virginia, which I guess I never thought of it as a vacation destiny, but for folks in Virginia, it is, isn't it?
Yeah, wild and wonderful. That's where we go and get some quiet. So I did some mountain biking and a little bit of nothing, just sitting around, having some meals with my family, playing games and going on hikes. It was a good time and glad to be back. That's where we go to get some peace. So they call it the land of many uses. And it is wild and wonderful West Virginia. So I like to get away a couple times a year there. It's a good time. And as Steve was talking about Bible teaching, I credit Steve for the reason I know what I know about the Bible because I've had to study it to teach it. And that's one of the best ways to learn something. And so I taught Bible at Cascais Christian School in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, all 4 years of high school Bible, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. And each grade did a different 25% of the Bible. So ended up teaching through the Bible 5 times in a row, 5 years in a row. So that really solidified the whole Testament. So one of the mantras that I had was not about the Old Testament.
We should really thank Stephen for what you bring to us then. Hey.
Yeah, definitely. I attribute most of what I know from that opportunity and conversations with Steve. I mean, he thinks deeply about the scriptures, reads a lot of the good scholars, friends with a lot of the good scholars like Howard Snyder and others. And so we have deep conversations about God's word. So it's very important.
We're glad to have both of you with us today as we delve into Matthew 14. And as always, and everybody should do the same thing. For example, Robbie says, we're going to go to Matthew 14. You want to open your Bibles to like Matthew 13 or Matthew 12 or the beginning of the book and read up to that point to see what's up and who's where and what's going on. In this case, it's early in Jesus' ministry, even though Matthew's already 14 chapters into it. And he's just made his presentation at the synagogue in Nazareth, and he's back up probably on the northwest shore of Galilee. But he just heard about John the Baptist being executed by Herod And it starts off by saying, at the time Herod the Tetrarch heard about the fame of Jesus, and he said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He has been raised from the dead." That is why these miraculous power. He's referring to Jesus, thinking that he was John the Baptist raised from the dead. Well, he had just killed John the Baptist, who was actually a cousin of Jesus, and Jesus would have been grieving over this. When Jesus heard about this in chapter verse 13, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. He wanted to be by himself, but you can't get away from crowds when you're Jesus. Robbie, pick it up from there. What's
Yeah,
next?
and I think one of the most revealing passages is where he did the many miracles. When you see that many miracles and powers, well, he's about to do a greater miracle and a greater power with the multiplication of the loaves. And it actually attaches him to the manna in the wilderness. Remember, we have the I am the bread of life statements from John 6. The parallel passage here is John 6 and the feeding of the 5,000. And there we see that Jesus says, I am the manna that came down from heaven. So where we see God feeding the people and the connection that who is this that is doing this miraculous miracle, that this miracle is the miracle that sustains the Israelite people in the wilderness in Exodus. So I think that that's telling, and it's right here in verse 2. It says, this is John the Baptist. He has been raised from the dead. That is why these miraculous powers are at work in him. So this is the thing that's noticed about Jesus. And then right after this grief and right after this account of John the Baptist's death, we get the feeding of the
It
5,000.
also speaks to the public view of John the Baptist, that he could do miracles, that he was a very powerful individual and a prophet. To hear that coming from Herod's mouth after he's cut off his head and the body was buried, and this is a stunning development, and Jesus must have been terribly moved, but he was trapped by the crowd, and so he had to respond to that.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that they assume this is John the Baptist because there's a tension between the ministry of Jesus and the ministry of John the Baptist. Remember the account where they say, Rabbi, this guy's baptizing more disciples than you. And they're worried about John the Baptist's ministry being greater than Jesus. And he says,
Well,
you shouldn't
apparently
be
that was
concerned
one of
about
the reasons that led Jesus to take his disciples and head north, because he didn't want to attract the attention of the Pharisees at that point in his ministry. I mean, he had just been baptized. This was a brand new thing, and I never assume that he just does things on whim. He was so intentional about everything he did and when he did it, but he knew it was time to move on and to move north.
Yeah, and what's also fascinating is the whatever these miracles that they're referring to of John the Baptist. We know that he baptized more disciples than Jesus, but we don't know. What we don't understand is there's no record of these miracles that John the Baptist did any miracle that I'm aware of.
Mm-hmm.
So what are they referencing? But then it doesn't matter because Jesus is about to do one of the greatest miracles ever, and it's one of the few miracles that are included in all four of the gospel accounts, which is the feeding of the 5,000.
And
So
that's
we
why
see
that's
this.
why I say it may be that John the Baptist never did miracles, but the public saw him as operating on that level. And you know how public opinion can multiply itself, reaching Herod. I'm not sure that Herod ever witnessed John the Baptist baptizing, for example, or preaching. So all that could have been an assumption. It could have been the public's opinion of John, but either way, he was thought of very highly, and it rubbed off on Jesus at least in Herod's mind.
Yeah, yeah. So this feeding of the 5,000 that comes next is pretty phenomenal. This idea that they're in Galilee, there's over 5,000 men, not including women and children. So this could have been more than 5,000 people. And the text says there's much grass there, and we get it labeled in Matthew 14 that this is Bethsaida, excuse me, it's actually John 6 where we get the label that it is Bethsaida.
So that's
And-
the northeast shore of the Sea of Galilee.
Right. And at the time, the coastline of the Sea of Galilee has shifted. There's been a lot of silting there. There's been a lot of fluctuation in the water levels. But most scholars believe that Bethsaida is a seaside town, that it has an outlet to the Sea of Galilee, and that at one point in the first century, and that this is a fishing village where Philip is from. And so Philip is from the region of Bethsaida. And
So is Peter, so is Andrew, correct?
right. So in John 6, well, Peter, as an adult, makes his home in Capernaum. We know that Peter's house is there in Capernaum. But whether or not, he grew up or spent time in Bethsaida, I'm not too sure about that. But it's so important that we read the parallel passages, because if an account occurs in multiple places in the Gospels, we should read. So just for an example, the account of Jesus in Nazareth in the synagogue, that occurs in all of the synoptic Gospels. We can read that account, but it doesn't appear in John's Gospel. John is the Gospel that's not a synoptic meaning similar or same. And then here in John's Gospel, we do see the feeding of the 5,000, but we also get the bread of life discourse from Jesus. And here mentioned more detail in where this is happening. So in John's Gospel, it says, after this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias, and a large crowd was following him because of these signs that he was doing. And that's what John labels these miracles as signs. And he went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. So this is invoking the Exodus, according to John's account, already. And that's very important that we see that the Exodus is being invoked, because there's the unleavened bread there as part of the Passover feast.
Well, of course, Passover is a commemoration of the Exodus. We should mention that just for general background. The two go together.
Right. And Steve and I were talking earlier, and he was bringing up the feast throughout the Bible, but certainly that this is a hearkening back and forward, actually, to the Last Supper. Steve, you want to say anything more about that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, two things just popped into mind. One, it's like foreshadowing the Lord's Supper and that celebration that Jesus institutes at Passover, where he says, this is the new covenant. And then my memory goes back to the first time we see like bread and wine used in celebration in the Bible is with Melchizedek in Genesis 14, when he puts it out before Abraham after Abraham comes back from his successful military campaign, and he gives them that bread and wine to refresh Abraham and his household. And so we have that image there of bread giving life and refreshment from the very beginning of the Bible, and this continues with that theme.
Is that the occasion of the use of bread and wine that would have instilled itself in the Hebrew culture? Is that where they see the roots going
Well,
back?
I think so. I mean, I'm quite sure it is. The first time bread is used in the Bible, of course, it's Genesis chapter 3. You're going to work hard for your bread. It's not going to be as easy as it used to be, and because of the fall. And then the next time we see it, it's used as refreshment. It's used as something giving life, and I think that continues on throughout Scripture.
Yeah, but it's a regular part of the Hebrew diet. It was bread, olives, wine, and so even today, if you do a tour of Israel, you'll get pita bread and hummus and olives and cheese. Standard kind of issue there, but this also calls back to Jesus's words that in the Lord's Supper. Give us this day our daily bread, which again harkens back to manna, which comes later. I mean, you do see the Eucharist, bread and wine with Melchizedek. He's a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. That's what Hebrews says about Jesus. And so some believe this is even a pre-incarnate presence of Christ with Abraham, with Melchizedek. So Melchizedek exists before the Levitical priesthood exists, and that's important to note because the Levitical priesthood doesn't exist until the tabernacle and the ordering of the people in to tribes and the tribe of Levi after the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Well, you made that point many times that
Yeah.
even Jesus appears in the Old Testament too.
Right.
Before the Levitical priesthood was ever thought of within the Hebrew culture. So he's been there all the time. To think that he was connected with that, I think, is a logical assumption.
Yeah, these theophanies. So that's why John connects this feeding of the 5,000, to the manna in the wilderness. You get the I am statements in John's gospel where Jesus says, I am the bread of life. Your ancestors, forefathers, they ate manna in the wilderness. And so I am the bread of life says, I am the bread, because manna is a question. Manna, what is it? And Jesus comes onto the scene in John 6 and says, I am what it is. I am the bread of life. And in the Lord's Prayer itself, give us this day our daily bread. So this Jesus is the bread giver. And so at the Last Supper, when the Last Supper is instituted, he says, take, eat, this is my body, which is given for you. Whenever you do this in remembrance of me. He takes that bread, he blesses it, he breaks it, he gives it. And those are the three motions of the Eucharist or communion: blessed, broken, and given. And so we see this at the feeding of the 5,000. The Eucharist is foreshadowed, or communion is foreshadowed. But before we get there, we see Philip in Bethsaida, and we were leaving off there that in John's gospel, it's the only account, and it is at Passover, and that's what we jumped off on just now, looking back to the Exodus. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand, lifting up his eyes then and seeing a large crowd. And this is, again, the image is this massive crowd of people in front of Jesus. And we know there were hundreds of thousands of Israelites in the wilderness, hungry. And Jesus sees the crowd. And it reminds us of the Exodus and the wilderness wanderings, where there's a large, hungry mass of people in an open space. Jesus sees them, and he says to Philip, and again, there's 12 disciples and 5,000 men at least.
Matthew does not mention Philip, but apparently.
Right. That's why we got to go back to John to get him. And I think it's important because not only does it tell us where we are, but it connects the account to the Passover. So Matthew includes details. There's less details, I would say, than John's gospel account. But here he asks Philip when he could have asked anyone. He says, get these people some bread. Jesus said to Philip, where are we to buy bread? Why does he ask Philip? Because Philip is from Bethsaida. And so Philip is to know. And by the way, this tips off the crowd and the disciples that if Philip's saying there's not enough money and there's not enough bread in this town to feed this crowd. So Bethsaida is a small place. This crowd is from all over. They're not just from the region. So Jesus proceeds to do a miracle, but he's setting the miracle up by showing.
He's training his disciples at the same time. This is still he's setting an example for them while he's teaching the people. Do you suppose this massive crowd recognized the miraculous event they were witnessing?
For sure. And we know they recognize it because of Philip's own words. Jesus says this to Philip to test him because they know that there's not enough bread. And Philip answered 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for them to get just a little. If there was enough money, if there was enough bread, we couldn't even feed this crowd a little. And we know that he doesn't feed them a little. He takes this small boy's 5 barley loaves, which, by the way, barley loaves are food for the poor. Wheat is good. Barley is less good. This is a poor person's lunch. You've got this little boy with 5 loaves, and they're not just any loaves, they're barley loaves. And he has 2 fish, small fish, probably the Galilee fish, which is like a bluegill. And so but what are these for so many is the question. Like, we got this boy, we got his lunch, and Jesus said, have the people sit down. And then we get another clue about this place. It says there's much grass there in this place. So the men sat down, and there it is, the men. This is excluding the women and the children here. The men sit down, about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks. So again, he takes the loaves, he blesses them, gives thanks. That's what Eucharist means, by the way. It's the great thanksgiving. And we get it from this moment of the blessing, breaking, and giving. So he distributes to those who were seated, so also the fish. And here's the tell that this is a great miracle. Because even if we had money, we could only give them a little bit. But this says that he distributed to those who were seated, and they had as much as they wanted.
In keeping with mandatory hospitality.
Right. If you want to be hospitable, your cup must overflow. And so this idea that it's an abundance, it's an overflowing abundance of food here. And so and not only that, but they gather up fragments of leftovers, 12 baskets full of leftovers. Why 12?
Is that a reference to manna in the desert?
It's the reference to the 12 tribes in the wilderness.
12 baskets. Yes, I didn't make that connection.
Yeah, and it's a reference to the 12 disciples. And later in Mark's gospel, I think Mark has a brilliant account of a synthesis of both the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000, because we know Jesus does this miracle again for the Gentiles. That's the feeding of the 4,000 in the Decapolis. Mark has Jesus saying to his disciples, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. And they began to question amongst themselves, why is he talking about leaven? Why is he talking about the Pharisees? And then one of the disciples goes, it's because we forgot to bring bread. We forgot to bring the bread. And then Jesus says, let me ask you a question. The feeding of the 5,000, how many baskets full of leftovers did we have? And they said 12. And the feeding of the 4,000, how many baskets of leftovers were there? And he says 7. And so there's 7 baskets of leftovers in the feeding of the 4,000. So 7 in numerology, this is the number of perfection. So it's God's number. 7 days a week, it's the number of completion. So there's a complete amount left over from after everyone's satisfied. And so Jesus was saying this to the disciples because they still didn't get it, and they still didn't trust him to be the God who is the God of bread, the God who gives the manna, the God who is the manna. He is the provision. He's the one who gives us our daily bread, and he is the one who is our daily bread. He gives us his body for food. He says, I am the bread that came down from heaven. Unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life in you. So Jesus is equating himself with the man in the wilderness. And so he is our provision.
There's so much yet to come. He's just getting started in his ministry, and feeding of the 5,000 and then the 4,000 and the walking on the water, and so much to see there. And Robbie, you help us put it all together. We appreciate that very much. I should have mentioned at the start that Robbie is also the executive director of Preserving Bible Times. It's a ministry we're very close to here at Broken Road Radio. And you may want to visit the website. It is preservingbibletimes.org is the website. And it's all about biblical context. It has much to offer for free. You can purchase streaming video, ebooks, a number of things there, all of it teaching you how to read between the lines and seeing what's there when you open your own Bible. And it equips you in a marvelous way to teach your own Bible study or to conduct your own small group. So we recommend a visit to the website, preservingbibletimes.org. Robbie, Stephen, thank you. Stephen, it was a delight to have you here. I'm glad he let you get a word in edgewise there.
Yep. Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Robbie, thank you. And welcome home. We'll see you next week, okay?
Joy, privilege, and a pleasure to be with you on the Broken Road. David, thanks for having us on.